Corrupt cops celebrate in court. Freezes when black woman unmasks as their new FBI director. A roar of laughter echoed through the courthouse hallway as four uniformed officers strutted past reporters with self-satisfied grins. Cameras flashed, capturing their moment of triumph. For months they had walked a thin line between hero and villain, drawing suspicion for their brazen abuse of power. Yet, they managed to outsmart the very system sworn to keep them in check. Little did they know, a solemn, poised black woman was watching them from the corner of the room, someone they had overlooked and underestimated. In less than an hour, she would flip their world upside down and unravel the truth behind every despicable act they thought they had hidden forever. Nestled between sprawling farmland and the glimmer of a distant metropolis stood the city of Brinkhaven, once a thriving community of hard-working families, honest businesses, and civic pride. With its wide downtown streets and stately courthouse perched on a slight hill, Brinkhaven resembled a picturesque postcard. Yet behind the veneer of small-town pleasantries, a creeping sense of dread had infected the streets. Residents locked their doors at dusk and whispered rumors of corruption that reached the highest levels of law enforcement. The Brinkhaven Police Department, BPD, had once been admired for its active community involvement. Officers used to coach youth basketball, attend neighborhood picnics, and volunteer for local events. Over time, however, the atmosphere at the station shifted. Rumors of bribery, protection rackets, and hush money paid to certain officers swirled like fallen leaves on a windy autumn day. Police cruisers that once signaled safety now inspired fear. Sirens at midnight seemed to be the herald of shady deals rather than the pursuit of justice. People first noticed something was amiss when a local journalist, Kevin Cross, wrote a series of investigative articles. Kevin, a Brinkhaven native who worked for the county newspaper, the Brinkhaven Record, dared to question a spike in unsolved crimes. He began connecting dots, missing evidence in high-profile drug cases, suspiciously light sentencing for well-connected criminals, and a sudden surge in the personal wealth of certain officers. Whenever Kevin probed deeper, he was met with intimidation. Anonymous phone calls, slashed car tires, and cryptic threats scrawled on his front door. Nonetheless, the evidence kept stacking up. Kevin's articles shone a cautious light on four officers in particular: Captain Frank Kowalski, Lieutenant Darren Reese, Sergeant Brian O'Connor, and Officer Heather Mallory. Their arrests of known drug traffickers often ended in missing funds or lost confiscated assets. Official documents were mysteriously altered, and any snags in their meticulously crafted corruption machine were quickly smoothed over or hushed. The local district attorney, Elizabeth Calder, had grown suspicious as well. But each time she attempted to gather enough proof for an internal investigation, her superiors questioned her methods. The newly appointed police chief, Randall Pfeiffer, dismissed her concerns as mere witch hunts. Pfeiffer came from a neighboring county, but seemed more interested in career advancement than cleaning up Brinkhaven. Whenever Calder asked him to open an inquiry, Pfeiffer would flash his best politician's smile and say, "I'll look into it." Nothing ever happened. Fear grew among residents. Some braver citizens wrote letters or attended town hall meetings to ask about rising crime and potential corruption. After each gathering, the official line remained: "There is no corruption within Brinkhaven Police. All matters of discipline are handled internally." As for Kevin Cross, he pressed on, gathering tidbits of intel from terrified whistleblowers. He risked his reputation and safety to expose what was quickly becoming the city's worst scandal in decades. But no matter how damning the evidence seemed, certain powerful figures always shielded the four officers. D.A. Calder found critical documents missing from the city's archives. Kevin Cross found that potential witnesses had either moved away or recanted their statements under duress. The city council seemed paralyzed. A well-oiled machine of fear and intimidation protected BPD's dirty little secret. What no one expected, least of all the corrupt cops, was the sudden reallocation of federal resources to Brinkhaven. The FBI had been quietly monitoring trends in the area. Thanks to Kevin Cross's articles and a few anonymous calls placed to a federal tip line, a special undercover operation was launched from the J. Edgar Hoover building in Washington, D.C. Rumors of an incoming shakeup rippled through hush-hush channels. Unbeknownst to Brinkhaven PD, a single undercover agent had slipped into their midst. Her mission? Gather enough incriminating evidence to trigger federal indictments. But even her superiors at the Bureau had no clue of the magnitude of what she would discover, nor how it would all lead to one explosive day in court. In the heart of the Brinkhaven PD building, an aging, gray structure with flickering fluorescent lights, Captain Frank Kowalski held court. He'd spent most of his career presenting himself as the cop next door, eager to help and always wearing a friendly smile. The truth was far darker. Kowalski was the mastermind behind the illicit operations that had taken root in Brinkhaven. His office, with its cheap blinds and stale coffee, served as the nerve center for backroom deals and hush-money negotiations. Kowalski managed the local drug trade by dictating which dealers could operate freely, so long as they paid him a handsome cut. If any competitor popped up, Kowalski's team was dispatched to shut them down under a contrived bust. Then a portion of the confiscated cash or drugs disappeared, quietly enriching him and his loyal officers. Lieutenant Darren Reese, a tall man with a booming voice, acted as Kowalski's enforcer and personal pit bull. Reese's record was filled with commendations for bravery under fire, but that shining track record masked his willingness to do whatever his boss asked. No questions, no hesitation. He was the muscle, intimidating witnesses, suspects, and even fellow officers who dared cross Kowalski. Under his watch, Brinkhaven's rank-and-file officers rarely questioned orders. Sergeant Brian O'Connor was the intellect of the operation. He excelled at forging paperwork, manipulating timelines, and tampering with case files. His specialty was turning what should have been open-and-shut cases into labyrinthine dead ends. If D.A. Calder requested evidence from a specific case, O'Connor knew how to claim it had been lost in a computer glitch or destroyed by accident. He moved like a ghost through administrative loops, leaving minimal paper trails and stifling investigations before they began. Officer Heather Mallory, the youngest member of the group, was adept at blending in. With her wide, innocent eyes and a friendly demeanor, she had perfected the art of building trust in the community, only to exploit it. Mallory cultivated informants, teased out rumors, and fed the group critical intelligence on who might be cooperating with outsiders like Kevin Cross or D.A. Calder. She frequently visited local bars and nightclubs, cozying up to patrons who might have valuable information. If someone new showed up in town, or if an existing resident suddenly asked too many questions, Mallory would tag them for surveillance. The synergy among these four officers created a climate of pervasive fear and suspicion. Even those in the police force who weren't involved in wrongdoing were too terrified to speak out. Suspicions were met with dead-end promotions or forced resignations. For Captain Kowalski, the city's downfall was nothing personal, just business. He managed to rationalize that his actions kept Brinkhaven from devolving into complete chaos. After all, the drug trade was going to exist somewhere. He might as well control it and pocket the profits. To him, the public's trust was a resource to be harvested, not a sacred duty to be guarded. But small cracks began to form in his well-laid plans. Kevin Cross's articles had started to awaken the curiosity of the outside world. The FBI was quietly digging, and Kowalski suspected that infiltration might already have occurred. He felt an uneasy tension in the station's corridors, as though the walls were listening. To counter potential infiltration, Kowalski tasked Officer Mallory with identifying any new faces in Brinkhaven. For months, Mallory quietly investigated newcomers at the local library, coffee shops, and rental apartments. That was when she encountered Rachel Monroe, a shy woman who had recently moved to Brinkhaven to work at the county archives. Mallory found nothing overtly suspicious about Rachel, but there was something intangible that set off her gut instincts. She tried to dig deeper, but Rachel's background was impeccable on paper. A graduate degree in history from a reputable university, references from a small museum, and receipts for an out-of-state relocation. Rachel kept to herself, rarely socializing, always smiling politely whenever their paths crossed. Despite Mallory's instincts, no red flags popped up in official records. Although uneasy, Mallory decided to keep an eye on Rachel. She confided her suspicions to Kowalski, who told her not to worry. "We run this town. If she is a threat, we'll deal with her." But Mallory's intuition wouldn't let the matter rest. Sometimes the agent you never suspect is the one who can bring down an empire. Rachel Monroe was, in fact, Special Agent Tiana Rosewood of the FBI, an operative with a stellar track record for cracking high-stakes corruption cases. She had grown up in a tough Philadelphia neighborhood, watching how power and fear could corrupt entire communities. Tiana's childhood experiences shaped her into a relentless seeker of justice, unafraid to challenge the system, and determined to excel in a field dominated by men who often doubted her capabilities. Her undercover operation in Brinkhaven was approved by a small, tight-knit task force based in Washington, D.C., who had been alerted to suspicious patterns by the district attorney's office and tips from journalist Kevin Cross. She was well aware that, as a black woman in a predominantly white town, she might face prejudices, but that could also be her advantage. People often discounted her or assumed she was incapable. They would never guess she was the key to unraveling a sophisticated web of police corruption. Her first weeks in Brinkhaven were all about assimilation. She frequented the local library, introduced herself to staff at the county archives, where she pretended to work, and learned the intricacies of the city's daily life. She discovered that folks in Brinkhaven were friendly on the surface but guarded in their conversations. She took mental notes on social cliques, favored watering holes, and any local gossip that might lead her closer to Kowalski's operation. Tiana's break came when she found a way to befriend Kevin Cross. She had admired his investigative prowess from afar, appreciating how his articles had nudged the FBI to take notice. Over coffee at a local diner called Maggie's Kitchen, famous for its homemade pies, Tiana confided in Kevin that she was researching historical records about Brinkhaven's early settlers. He, in turn, expressed interest in her presence, hoping a fresh pair of eyes might help him with his next exposé. They talked at length about the city's architecture, local legends, and the wave of rumored police corruption. Tiana feigned skepticism, prompting Kevin to share more specifics. He revealed how witnesses vanished or recanted, how files went missing, how drug busts never led to convictions of significant figures. Tiana pressed him gently for names, times, places. She had to be cautious not to tip her hand. Kevin was a journalist, not law enforcement, and she needed to protect her cover at all costs. Still, Kevin's information proved invaluable, filling in key gaps. He suspected that Kowalski's crew had been carefully controlling the drug flow, and that they had powerful allies not just in Brinkhaven, but in neighboring jurisdictions. Tiana recognized she was dealing with a potential multi-county scandal, possibly even statewide. She compiled Kevin's leads into a secure diary app on her phone, which was itself hidden behind layers of encryption the Bureau had installed. In the late evenings, Tiana returned to her small apartment overlooking a quiet cul-de-sac. There, she contacted her Bureau handlers via a secure channel, sending coded updates. Each missive carried a sense of urgency. Situation escalates. Possible infiltration needed at the local PD. Suspects show heightened caution. She stressed that immediate action was necessary, but her superiors instructed patience. They wanted a solid case that would stand up in federal court, not a premature bust that could unravel. Over time, Tiana cleverly inserted herself into small volunteer events around town, hoping to come into contact with Officer Heather Mallory or Sergeant Brian O'Connor. She donned a friendly, introverted persona, offering to help with local charity drives or historical society fundraisers. Her modest but elegant style, bright smile, and polite demeanor made her approachable. Little by little, she started small conversations. "What's the best place to get coffee around here?" Or, "Have you heard about that weird break-in last week?" She feigned harmless curiosity, wanting them to let their guard down. One night, while attending a community potluck at Brinkhaven Civic Center, she caught a glimpse of Officer Mallory scanning the room. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and Mallory nodded in recognition. Tiana responded with a gracious smile, playing the part of a timid newcomer. Mallory walked over and struck up a conversation. "You're the one who just moved here, right? Rachel Monroe." "Yes, that's right," Tiana responded, her voice slightly higher than usual. "I'm working at the county archives. It's such a quaint town you have here." Mallory surveyed her with polite curiosity. "So what brings you all the way to Brinkhaven for an archives job?" "It's a temporary research project on local historical records. I'm hoping to turn it into a publication on the city's founding families." Tiana shrugged, trying to appear awkward yet enthusiastic. "Might sound boring, but I find it fascinating." "Boring? Not at all," Mallory said with a gentle laugh, though her eyes were calculating. "Well, if you need any help or if you ever feel unsafe, just give me a call at the station." Though the conversation lasted only a few minutes, Tiana sensed that Mallory was sizing her up. She played her part well, unsuspecting, polite, harmless. That night, Tiana sent a coded message to her FBI contact. "Mallory initiated conversation. She's suspicious. Need deeper caution." Over the next few weeks, Tiana dug deeper into the Brinkhaven PD's daily operations. She discovered that the police station's night shift paperwork was often incomplete, leaving the door wide open for forged reports. She also heard rumors from locals about a private property on the outskirts of Brinkhaven, an abandoned warehouse that had become a hotspot for suspicious activity. Tiana's gut told her that if the BPD was indeed orchestrating crimes, this warehouse was probably a front for drug storage or stolen goods. She arranged a covert meeting with District Attorney Elizabeth Calder at a roadside diner just outside city limits. Calder was initially cautious, unsure if Tiana was yet another potential threat. Once Tiana discreetly flashed her FBI credentials, concealed under her false identity documents, Calder's shoulders visibly relaxed. "You have no idea how grateful I am that the FBI is finally stepping in," Calder said, stirring her coffee nervously. "But these officers are careful. They're not sloppy." Tiana nodded. "I know. My job is to gather airtight evidence. I'm going to need your help for that." Calder tapped her nails on the table. "Kevin Cross might be our best lead, but he's limited in what he can do as a journalist. And I'm hamstrung. My office is under political pressure not to investigate the PD. Chief Pfeiffer has direct lines to the mayor's office. Every time I push, they push back. Can you secure any financial records? Something that shows a sudden influx of money for these officers?" Tiana asked. "Bank statements, property purchases, anything?" Calder sighed. "I've tried, but their assets seem deliberately laundered. We suspect out-of-state shell companies, possible offshore accounts. But everything I've found so far isn't conclusive enough for indictments." Leaning forward, Tiana spoke in a quiet yet determined tone. "Then we'll need a direct link, an undercover buy or recorded conversation that implicates them. If we can just place them at a corrupt deal, that might trigger RICO charges." Calder's eyes glimmered with a newfound hope. "I'll do everything I can to help." In the days following that meeting, Tiana devised a plan with her bureau handlers. They suggested that she attempt to position herself as a potential buyer or broker in the local drug market. Risky, but if done correctly, it could yield conclusive evidence. She spent her evenings visiting a seedy bar on the outskirts of Brinkhaven, establishing rapport with small-time dealers, letting slip that she had connections in another city. Gradually, word of her presence trickled up to the bigger fish in the underworld, names that Tiana suspected had direct ties to Kowalski and his crew. Meanwhile, local tensions flared. Kevin Cross's articles became more brazen, hinting at specific incidents where confiscated cash disappeared. The police chief, Randall Pfeiffer, publicly denounced Kevin and threatened legal action for defamation. The mayor joined the chorus, claiming Brinkhaven's law enforcement was squeaky clean. But the more they denied it, the more the public suspected a cover-up. One evening, Tiana received a cryptic text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging." She deleted it instantly, aware that any response might compromise her phone. She guessed the threat came from Kowalski's circle, The intimidation only fueled her determination. Then came the break she'd been waiting for. Through one of the small-time dealers at the bar, Tiana arranged a meeting to discuss a potential drug deal. She was told to drive to the abandoned warehouse on a Friday night. If Kowalski or his officers were involved, Tiana would have the chance to gather first-hand evidence. But the operation was fraught with danger. She'd be alone, in the dark, dealing with criminals who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a threat. Her FBI superiors insisted on a minimal presence of backup to avoid blowing her cover. Tiana would wear a concealed wire and carry a small camera disguised in a charm on her bracelet. The plan, if Kowalski or his team arrived, Tiana would record every second of their conversation, then discreetly pass the evidence to DA Calder. With enough proof, the Bureau could step in. On that fateful Friday night, Tiana drove her unremarkable sedan to the edge of Brinkhaven. A battered sign near the warehouse read, "No trespassing. Private property." Beyond lay a deserted lot, gravel crunching under her tires. The moon cast an eerie glow on the rusted metal siding. She swallowed her nerves, double-checked her wire, and stepped out. Clad in a leather jacket and jeans, she aimed to blend in with the rough crowd she expected to find. Inside, the warehouse smelled of mold and stale machinery. Broken windows lined the upper walls. A single dim light swung overhead, revealing scattered crates and an old forklift. Tiana waited, footsteps echoing across the concrete floor. Every second felt like an eternity, and every rustle of wind felt like the approach of danger. At last she heard voices. A side door screeched open, and 3 figures entered. She recognized one as a local drug runner she'd met at the bar, a wiry man nicknamed Sly. The other 2 wore plain clothes, but Tiana's heart sank when she recognized the taller man, Lieutenant Darren Reese. He was accompanied by Sergeant Brian O'Connor, whose cold gaze swept the room. "You're the new buyer, huh?" Reese barked, his tone dripping with suspicion. Tiana feigned confidence, forcing a smirk. "That's what I've been told. Are we here to do business or what?" O'Connor looked at Reese, then scowled. "We don't like new faces." Sly, attempting to play the middleman, tried to ease the tension. "Chill, fellas. She's got serious backing from out of town. Money's good, I checked." Reese stood inches from Tiana, his imposing figure overshadowing her. "If you try anything, we'll bury you so deep they'll forget you existed." Tiana locked eyes with him. "Noted. Let's just talk numbers." They spent the next 10 minutes discussing the quantity of product, possible distribution routes, and crucially, the protection fee that would guarantee safe passage through Brinkhaven. Reese spelled out the arrangement in no uncertain terms. Tiana would pay a regular cut to the department via Sly, and in return, no traffic stops or arrests. If she missed a payment, or if any of her runners got creative, the deal was off. Every word was recorded by Tiana's hidden devices. She tried not to reveal her relief when Reese explicitly mentioned the police department's cut, a direct admission of corruption. This was gold. The final step was making sure she could leave alive and with the evidence intact. Yet just as Tiana sealed the deal with a handshake, a voice from the shadows startled them. "What the hell is going on here?" In walked Captain Kowalski himself, flanked by Officer Mallory. Tiana's pulse quickened. If she had to face all 4, her chances of escaping unscathed were slim. Reese turned to Kowalski, half exasperated, half reverent. "Just finalizing the arrangement with our new buyer, Cap. She's with Sly." Kowalski narrowed his eyes at Tiana. "I don't trust new players, not without a thorough background check." He motioned to Mallory, who stepped forward with a practiced intimidation tactic. "I've seen you around town," Mallory said. "Rachel Monroe, right? Moved here to study records?" Tiana forced a dismissive shrug. "That's my cover story, sure, for all the old folks in town. Didn't realize I'd draw so much attention." Her nonchalance seemed to mollify Kowalski a bit. He crossed his arms, considering. "We run a tight ship here. If you screw with us—" "I get it," Tiana interrupted, inwardly praying her boldness wouldn't get her killed. "We're all in this for one thing, money. I'll pay my share and keep quiet. End of story. Kowalski stared her down for a tense moment, then nodded to Reese. Fine, we'll see how this plays out, but watch her. Mallory was ordered to do a more thorough background check ASAP. Tiana knew her cover was on borrowed time. Before leaving, Mallory shot Tiana a look that was half suspicion, half grudging respect. Tiana, for her part, kept her poker face, hoping the beads of sweat forming at her temple weren't too obvious in the dim light. She made her exit smoothly, driving away with Reese's voice echoing in her mind. We'll be in touch. The mission had succeeded beyond expectations. She had recorded direct admissions of corruption from high-ranking officers. However, she was now on Kowalski's radar. Any misstep could mean deadly retaliation. As Tiana raced back toward her apartment, she felt a surge of adrenaline. She knew that the final blow against Brinkhaven's corrupt police operation was fast approaching. The evidence was potent enough to trigger federal indictments if properly presented. She had to get that recording to the right hands before Kowalski's crew figured out who she really was. First thing the next morning, Tiana arranged to meet Kevin Cross in an abandoned park on the outskirts of town. For once, she felt a tinge of relief at the early morning mist that cloaked the park in privacy. She handed him a thumb drive containing compressed audio and video files of her encounter at the warehouse. It's all there. Explicit proof of the BPD's involvement in drug trafficking, Tiana whispered, her eyes darting around to ensure no one overheard. You need to keep it safe. If anything happens to me, you run this story. Expose them completely. Kevin stared at the thumb drive as if it were a live grenade. You're serious. This is what I've been trying to uncover for years. His voice trembled with both excitement and fear. Yes, and now we have the chance to end it, Tiana said. But you can't publish this yet, not until we coordinate with DA Calder and the FBI. If Kowalski suspects the feds have this, he'll lash out. We need him relaxed, celebrating his sense of invincibility. Kevin nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. All right, I'll hold off. Just promise me you'll be safe. No promises, Tiana replied with a half smile, then disappeared into the morning fog. With the incriminating evidence secured, Tiana contacted DA Calder from a burner phone. They agreed to meet at a secret location, an old library basement that Calder's office sometimes used for sensitive document storage. There, Tiana played the recordings for Calder, who listened with widened eyes. By the time the final clip ended, Calder looked both triumphant and deeply anxious. This is exactly what we needed, she said. We can bring federal charges. RICO, conspiracy, drug trafficking, corruption, the works. But I need time to convene a grand jury. Don't take too long, Tiana warned. Mallory's suspicious of me. She'll dig until she uncovers my real identity. If that happens before we strike, we lose everything. Calder promised to expedite the process. She explained that the FBI's official presence would be required to serve warrants to the police department. Tiana's undercover sting would be the linchpin. The plan was to orchestrate simultaneous arrests to prevent any of the corrupt officers from fleeing or destroying evidence. But fate had another twist in store. That evening, Tiana was in her apartment reviewing the latest field intel. She noticed a black SUV parked across the street with tinted windows. Could be just a neighbor's friend, she told herself, yet her instincts screamed otherwise. After an hour, the SUV didn't move. The silhouette of a man behind the wheel remained unmoving. Quietly, Tiana assembled a small go bag with essential items, her fake ID, extra phone, a loaded pistol, and the ring-coded key to her sedan. She turned off the lights in her apartment and peered through the blinds. The SUV's headlights flickered on. Whoever was inside knew she was watching. Suddenly, she heard footsteps in the hallway, approaching her door. A single knock echoed through her modest living space. Tiana crept to the door, gun in hand, and opened it just enough to see who was there. To her surprise, it was Kevin Cross, his face pale, sweat trickling down his forehead. He looked over his shoulder nervously. I think I'm being followed, he stammered. The same black SUV that's been outside your place was tailing me earlier. Get in, Tiana hissed, pulling him inside. We need to move now. She quickly explained the presence of the SUV. Kevin's jaw clenched. They're on to both of us. This is bad. Worse than bad, Tiana said. We've got to rendezvous with Calder tonight. There's no time to wait for a grand jury. If we stay here, we're as good as dead. They slipped out the back door of her apartment, carefully making their way through a narrow alley. The night was eerily quiet. Tiana kept her gun drawn, scanning every shadow. A few blocks over, she had parked a rental car she sometimes used for added security. She guided Kevin through the dark streets until they reached it. Moments before they could pull away, the black SUV roared onto the scene. Headlights pinned them in place. Tiana glanced at Kevin, who looked like he was about to panic. She locked the doors and started the engine. The SUV barreled straight toward them, but Tiana slammed on the gas, narrowly avoiding a collision as she sped into the main road. A tense chase ensued through Brinkhaven's deserted streets. Kevin held onto the dashboard for dear life. Tiana expertly maneuvered, taking sharp turns, cutting through side streets, trying to lose their pursuer. She recognized some of the routes as typical BPD patrol paths. If Kowalski or Reese were in the SUV, they might know these streets even better than she did. Finally, she spotted a detour leading toward the highway. Gunning the engine, Tiana swerved onto the entrance ramp. The SUV was momentarily stuck at a red light, giving them a narrow window to escape. She didn't let up until they were miles away from Brinkhaven, a swirl of adrenaline pumping through her veins. They parked behind an abandoned service station, both breathing heavily. Kevin wiped sweat from his brow. I can't believe how close that was. Tiana nodded, her eyes scanning the empty lot. We have to assume they know who I am, or at least suspect. We can't go back to my apartment, and you can't go back to your place. It's not safe. What about Calder? Kevin asked, terror lacing his words. She'll have to meet us somewhere else. A safe house, maybe. Tiana's mind raced. I have a contact who can set that up. They spent the night in the car, each taking turns to keep watch. As dawn broke, Tiana reached out to her bureau handler, who arranged for them to rendezvous at a government-owned safe house located a half-hour drive out of town. With that plan in motion, they set out, hearts pounding, unsure if they'd make it out alive, or if Kowalski's men would intercept them first. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of covert planning and legal maneuvering. At the safe house, Tiana and Kevin coordinated closely with DA Calder and a small team of federal agents. They meticulously mapped out how and when they would execute arrests. The biggest question loomed: could they trust the local court system, or was it too compromised? Calder insisted on filing charges in a federal district court, bypassing the local Brinkhaven bench. The moment the indictments became public, Kowalski's crew would be caught off guard. But word leaked out anyway, possibly from an inside source at the courthouse. Suddenly the plan shifted. Kowalski and his officers preemptively demanded a hearing in Brinkhaven's local court, claiming the entire affair was based on false allegations and entrapment by an overzealous district attorney. It set the stage for a dramatic showdown. The corrupt cops marching into court to clear their names while Tiana, still officially unidentified, prepared to testify if needed. But an even bigger twist was about to unfold. For unbeknownst to Calder, Tiana had recently been appointed to a role far beyond undercover agent. She had just been confirmed as the new director of the FBI. The Senate hearing for the FBI director position had concluded weeks before her Brinkhaven assignment ever became so dangerous. Her official swearing-in had been kept under wraps, orchestrated by her superiors, who recognized the high-stakes nature of her mission. Thus, Tiana was operating in dual capacities, undercover agent on the ground, and effectively, the Bureau's incoming chief. The public at large had no clue. Even the local FBI field office in Brinkhaven assumed Tiana was just a field agent. High-level secrecy was maintained, as any leak could jeopardize not just this operation, but national security matters tied to Tiana's appointment. On the day of the hearing, Brinkhaven's small courthouse was swarmed by media vans, protesters, and curious onlookers. Kowalski, Reese, O'Connor, and Mallory arrived in crisp uniforms, escorted by their lawyer, a smarmy defense attorney named Malcolm Hardwick. They strode into the courtroom, heads high, confident that the system they had manipulated for so long would once again shield them. D.A. Calder took her seat at the prosecution's table, flanked by an assistant district attorney and a federal prosecutor sent from Washington. Kevin Cross sat in the front row of the gallery, furiously scribbling notes, ready to blast out the scoop of a lifetime. For a tense moment, Tiana was nowhere in sight. Judge Harold Fitch, an elderly man with thinning white hair, presided over the hearing. He peered down over his glasses at the crowd, clearly overwhelmed by the media glare. "Order, order in the court," he announced, banging his gavel. "This is a preliminary hearing to address claims brought by the District Attorney's Office and the United States Department of Justice against certain members of the Brinkhaven Police Department." The defense attorney jumped at the chance to speak. "Your Honor, these allegations are baseless. My clients are brave officers who have dedicated themselves to this community. There is no evidence they have engaged in corruption or wrongdoing. We request immediate dismissal of all charges." Before Calder could respond, the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. In walked Tiana, dressed in a sharp black suit. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. She walked with quiet confidence to the prosecution's table. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. "Your Honor," Calder began, "I would like to introduce you to a key figure in this investigation." Calder paused, letting the tension build. "May I present Special Agent Tiana Rosewood of the FBI, whose undercover work has provided substantial evidence of these officers' crimes." A hush fell. Kowalski and his crew exchanged alarmed glances. Hardwick's mouth tightened, but that was not the only surprise. Calder continued, her voice resonating with pride. "Furthermore, I have been informed that Miss Rosewood is not merely a special agent. She has in fact been appointed as the new director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The gallery erupted in gasps. Camera shutters clicked wildly. Kowalski and his co-defendants froze, disbelief etched on their faces. The defense attorney tried to object, sputtering, This is... Objection, Your Honor. This is an ambush, a spectacle." Judge Fitch hammered his gavel. "Order, order, I say." He glared at Hardwick, then looked at Tiana. "Is this true?" Tiana stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor. I've been tasked with investigating corruption within this department. My appointment as director has only recently been finalized, which is why the operation remained confidential. I have recordings, documents, and testimonies that establish the guilt of these officers beyond any reasonable doubt." Kowalski jolted out of his stupor, turning to Hardwick. "Get me out of this now," he hissed. Hardwick fumbled with his papers, face slick with nervous sweat. The crowd watched with rapt attention as Tiana presented the damning evidence. Audio recordings of the warehouse meeting, typed transcripts of bribe negotiations, and even statements from minor co-conspirators who had flipped under pressure. With each piece of evidence laid before the court, Kowalski's bravado disintegrated. Mallory stared at the floor, refusing to meet Tiana's eyes. O'Connor fidgeted, his face pale. Reese clenched his jaw, fists trembling with suppressed rage. When Tiana finished, Hardwick attempted a feeble rebuttal. "We have no proof that these recordings were lawfully obtained, or that they weren't manipulated. My clients were entrapped. This is an egregious violation of their rights." Unflustered, Tiana addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, the evidence was obtained pursuant to a valid warrant from the Federal District Court. Everything has been done by the book, and if there's any question about the integrity of the recordings, we have forensic experts ready to authenticate them." Judge Fitch examined the documents in front of him, flipping through them with mounting concern. It was clear the evidence was overwhelming, a meticulously woven tapestry that showed the systematic corruption of Brinkhaven PD's top officers. Calder seized the moment. "We request that the defendants be remanded into federal custody immediately, given the seriousness of the charges and the risk of flight." The defense attorney, shoulders slumped, pleaded for bail, but the judge was in no mood for leniency. Given the severity of these allegations and the evidence presented, bail is denied. The defendants will be taken into federal custody, pending trial. The bailiffs moved in, cuffing each officer. Kowalski erupted in protest. "This is a setup. That woman tricked us. I want my lawyer to—" His words were drowned out by the court officer's commands. Mallory sobbed quietly, while Reese glared daggers at Tiana, as if wishing he could strike her down. O'Connor seemed dazed, muttering curses under his breath. In the chaos, Tiana stepped aside, letting the federal agents handle the arrests. Cameras captured every second, and in that moment, Brinkhaven witnessed the downfall of 4 once-feared cops who had believed themselves untouchable. Brinkhaven awoke to a rare hush on the morning after the arrests. A muted sunrise settled over the rows of modest homes and shuttered storefronts, almost as if the sky itself was holding its breath. No more sirens wailed through the night, no more foreboding presence of squad cars, their occupants armed with unspoken threats. The city that had once cowered under the invisible weight of its own police force found itself in a strange new world where corruption was suddenly, astonishingly being held to account. For residents who had grown resigned to the stench of graft, the reality was both exhilarating and terrifying. They lined the streets, some hugging each other in cautious optimism, others remaining stoic, waiting to see if true justice would prevail. Public opinion shifted moment by moment, swaying between relief that the corrupt were finally exposed and dread that a harsh reprisal might follow. These people had not forgotten all the times Brinkhaven's system claimed internal investigations would fix everything, only for the same crooked officers to show up days later, still wearing their badges. Yet, on this day, something felt different. Inside the holding cells of the federal courthouse, Captain Frank Kowalski stood by the small, barred window in his new beige jumpsuit. He had spent decades in uniform, always with starched collars and polished boots that signaled authority. That was all gone now. The bare concrete floors and the stale odor of disinfectant in the detention area were brutal reminders of how far he had fallen. He could feel the uneasy silence from the other side of the cell block, where his once loyal subordinates, Lieutenant Darren Reese, Sergeant Brian O'Connor, and Officer Heather Mallory, were likewise confined. Their presence weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder of his shattered domain. The space between them wasn't merely physical bars and walls. It was the immense gulf created by betrayal, blame, and failed loyalties. For the first time, Kowalski confronted the realization that he was not immortal. The allure of easy money and undisputed power had clouded his judgment for years. He had convinced himself that Brinkhaven's residents needed him to keep order, his way. Now, stripped of his rank and bravado, Kowalski wrestled with the truth. He had become the very menace he once swore to eradicate. Lieutenant Darren Reese, confined to a separate cell, oscillated between fury and a despair that smoldered in his chest. He had always been Kowalski's muscle, and his pride refused to let him appear vulnerable in front of the guards. Whenever footsteps echoed in the corridor, he hardened his expression, a show of defiance. But in the quiet moments, he would stare at the gray walls, fists clenched, questioning how it had all come crashing down. He blamed himself as much as he blamed Kowalski. Standing at the edge of a crumbling empire, he wondered if, in trying to wield absolute control, he had lost control of himself a long time ago. Sergeant Brian O'Connor was another story altogether, a man of cerebral cunning now paralyzed by the unescapable truth. In the hush of his cell, his mind churned frantically, sorting through illusions of a plausible defense, an angle that might spin the facts in his favor. But deep down, he recognized the absolute thoroughness of Tiana Rosewood's sting operation. The forged documents he once believed were impeccable lay bare. The entire machine he had so meticulously designed to thwart oversight was now evidence of his guilt. He was staring into the abyss of a lifetime's worth of deceit, and the abyss offered nothing but condemnation. Officer Heather Mallory, the youngest among them, found herself in the throes of a moral crisis. She'd joined Kowalski's ring believing, at least at first, that it was a practical way to secure funds in a struggling department. Over time, she hardened her heart and convinced herself she was just following orders. Yet, in the solitary space of her cell, Mallory wept for the first time in years. The tears weren't solely for her lost freedom, but for every life she had manipulated, every trust she had shattered. Try as she might, she couldn't ignore the image of Tiana Rosewood, poised, determined, quietly dismantling their corrupt enterprise from within. Outside the sterile walls of the detention area, the townspeople of Brinkhaven were beginning the slow, painful process of rebuilding their faith in the rule of law. A special meeting convened at City Hall, where local activists, business owners, and ordinary citizens gathered to voice their anger, relief, and aspirations for reform. Local activists demanded civilian oversight of the police department, calling for thorough vetting of new hires and mandatory body cams. Business owners urged the council to allocate more resources for community policing, hoping to attract new investment and tourism. Concerned parents spoke of how their children had grown up afraid of those who should have been their protectors. Former Police Chief Randall Pfeiffer had resigned in disgrace, though rumors swirled that he might face lesser charges for willful negligence. The mayor, currently weathering a recall initiative, tried to maintain a semblance of authority, but found little sympathy. People demanded accountability from every corner of the city's leadership. In the midst of this civic uproar, Kevin Cross became something of a local hero, though he carried the distinction uneasily. Journalists from national outlets flocked to interview him, drawn by his unwavering crusade for truth, in a city where the truth was systematically buried. Kevin responded with humility, crediting the courage of whistleblowers and the grit of DA Elizabeth Calder. Behind closed doors, however, he battled a surge of guilt. He recalled nights spent doubting whether he should continue his investigations, wondering if a single misstep would make him the next victim. Now, as cameras captured his every word, he felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow for all the people who had suffered under Kowalski's rule. At the federal courthouse, Tiana Rosewood, now fully revealed as the newly appointed director of the FBI, found herself caught between triumph and a profound melancholy. She had achieved the unthinkable, infiltrating a corrupt department, gathering airtight evidence, and handing the conspirators over to justice. But the weight of her victory pressed on her like an invisible burden. The crowning of her career came at the price of witnessing an entire city wounded by those sworn to protect it. As the day wore on, Tiana remained in a secure office, finalizing paperwork, coordinating with federal prosecutors, and offering statements to the press. Through a one-way window, she watched Kowalski and the other officers being led to transport vans that would take them to a more secure facility. Their defiant faces had melted into expressions of grim inevitability. A knock sounded at the door. DA Elizabeth Calder entered, looking weary, yet determined. "Press is going wild out there," Calder said, setting down a stack of legal documents. "They want a statement from you as the director." Tiana exhaled, resting a hand on the table's edge. "I'll give them a statement soon, but first we need to ensure the next steps. We can't let Brinkhaven slip back into the shadows." Calder nodded. "Agreed. I've already drafted motions to seize any remaining assets Kowalski and his crew acquired through illegal means. We're coordinating with the newly appointed interim police chief, and we're filing charges against a few more people who tried to hide evidence." A flicker of sadness crossed Tiana's eyes. Good. It's the only way to restore some faith in the system. She paused for a moment, caught between the official stance she needed to maintain and the personal toll it had taken. How are people in Brinkhaven handling the fallout? The question hung in the air, laden with complex truths. Calder lowered her gaze. There's anger, but there's hope too. Some see this as an opportunity for a true clean slate. Others are just exhausted by it all. Tiana walked to the window, looking out over the city. In every corruption case I've been part of, there's always a mix of relief and resentment. People are relieved the criminals got caught, but they resent that they were allowed to operate for so long. A moment of quiet solidarity passed between them. Despite Calder's local connections and Tiana's federal authority, they both felt the same sense of responsibility to help the community heal, to show them that justice was more than a buzzword or a convenient narrative. Later that afternoon, Tiana stood behind a gleaming metal podium bearing the Department of Justice seal. Cameras flashed in a barrage of light. Microphones from national news networks, local stations, and online channels formed a bouquet of technology, all pointed directly at her. She began with thanks, thanking whistleblowers, thanking District Attorney Calder, thanking the honest members of law enforcement who remained steadfastly dedicated to their oaths. Kevin Cross was in the front row, notebook open. Tiana caught his eye and nodded discreetly in gratitude. Her voice, calm and resonant, carried the solemn dignity of her office. Brinkhaven has proven that a community will ultimately stand against corruption when given a platform to do so, she declared. When those entrusted to protect us break that trust, we must hold them accountable, no matter how powerful they believe they are. The press erupted with questions. How could corruption have gone on for so long without state or federal intervention? What does this operation say about the Bureau's future initiatives to tackle small-town corruption? What message do you have for communities afraid to report police misconduct? Tiana answered each as candidly as she could without compromising ongoing investigations. She acknowledged systemic issues, the importance of oversight, and her resolve to make the FBI more proactive in rooting out corruption, big or small. Finally, a local reporter asked pointedly, "Director Rosewood, how do you feel personally, knowing you risked your life undercover, and that your appointment to lead the FBI could have been jeopardized by a single slip-up?" The question tugged at Tiana's own turbulent emotions. She allowed a brief moment of vulnerability to show on her face. "It was a risk I was willing to take. My personal ambition means nothing if we allow corruption to fester unchallenged. The FBI's mission is to safeguard justice, and I aim to carry that torch for every honest cop, every honest public servant, and every citizen who believes in the rule of law." When the press conference ended, Tiana retreated to the hallway, overwhelmed by a swirl of congratulations from federal officials and hushed admiration from staffers. Kevin Cross approached her, gently tapping on her shoulder. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, earnestness shining in his eyes, "for trusting me with the story and for protecting this city when no one else would." Tiana smiled softly. "You did your part too. Exposing the truth is never easy, especially when the odds are against you. Keep telling the stories that matter." His gaze drifted for a moment, as if wanting to say more, but in the end he simply nodded. They shook hands, aware that their combined efforts had irrevocably changed Brinkhaven's destiny. Later, alone in a small interview room, Tiana took a moment to reflect. She pressed her thumb to a silver badge in her hand, the FBI director's badge that had been officially presented to her in a private ceremony. In taking down Kowalski and his conspirators, she had solidified her new role with an unforgettable statement. No officer is above the law, no uniform grants immunity. Yet she also understood that what came next might be even more challenging. Ensuring Brinkhaven's police department was rebuilt on a foundation of integrity and community trust. Investigations would continue, policy reforms would be contested, and the city's wounds would need proper care to heal. Tiana resolved to remain involved, even from her lofty post in Washington, to monitor Brinkhaven's progress and intervene if necessary. Abandoning the place that almost cost her her life was out of the question. Within days, the federal government assigned a transitional oversight team to Brinkhaven PD. Fresh-faced recruits, former military veterans, experienced officers from nearby counties known for spotless records, arrived to fill the ranks left by Kowalski's indicted loyalists. They spent hours meeting with neighborhood groups, church leaders, and local youth programs, trying to bridge the deep chasm of mistrust. Slowly, the city's daily rhythms stabilized. The local diner, Maggie's Kitchen, bustled once again, its patrons talking about new beginnings rather than living in fear. Children rode their bikes without the anxious watch of worried parents, and high school sports teams invited the new officers to games, a gesture unthinkable during the era of corruption. Yes, scars would remain. The memory of systematic betrayal wouldn't vanish overnight, and many residents were still cautious when they saw a police cruiser pass by. But with each passing day, Brinkhaven took one more step forward. People dared to hope again. Tiana Rosewood departed Brinkhaven shortly after the last sentences were read. She left behind a city on the mend, a newly hopeful district attorney, a local journalist with national credibility, and a police department working tirelessly to correct its course. As her black SUV disappeared onto the highway leading toward Washington, D.C., she carried the lessons of Brinkhaven with her. Evil thrives in silence, but justice is louder when good people speak. For all their swagger and bravado, Kowalski and his crew learned that the law they once twisted for personal gain could not be permanently tamed. In the end, hard karma demands its price, sometimes delivered by a woman they never thought to underestimate, whose very identity would shock them into submission. Brinkhaven, for all its scars, became a testament to the power of truth and the resilience of a community determined to reclaim its soul. People found a renewed sense of civic duty, an awakened interest in local politics, and above all, a collective promise to never again let corruption fester in the shadows. Such was the legacy Tiana Rosewood left behind, a beacon of possibility showing that even in the quiet corners of America, justice can and will prevail, when someone brave enough is willing to stand up and see it through. A single resounding truth emerged from Brinkhaven's darkest days. Corruption cannot stand against the unwavering determination of those seeking justice. Captain Kowalski and his crew thought they owned the system. In the end, the system, championed by a black woman whose perseverance defied expectations, unmasked and dismantled their entire operation. Through the courageous work of investigative journalism, the relentless push from a dedicated district attorney, and the ultimate undercover sting by the new FBI director herself, Brinkhaven's hard-fought victory stands as a beacon of hope for communities everywhere. Thank you for joining us on this dramatic journey of deceit, danger, and redemption. If you found value in this story, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales. Your support helps us bring you more stories that inspire, enlighten, and above all, celebrate the triumph of justice.